Hello everyone, in today's video I complete the 3D printed 1/24 scale chassis I'm using for the Skyline and take it for a test drive. So I'm continuing with the 3D printed 1/24 scale Skyline project, which is utilizing this custom 3D printed all-wheel drive shaft-driven chassis, which I assembled in a previous video. With the chassis fully assembled, I was ready to begin installing all of the electronics. The first thing I needed to do was decide where I wanted to place the battery, receiver, and ESC. The small size of this chassis makes getting everything to fit a little difficult, but I was able to get everything placed so that all of the components will fit and can be easily mounted. Next, I needed to do some soldering so that all of the electronics can be plugged in. I started by soldering some bullet connectors to the end of each motor wire on the ESC. I then removed the plastic from around the outside of the ESC so I could solder the correct battery connector for the battery that I'm using. Next, I connected the ESC and steering servo to the receiver. I decided to use an adapter for the steering servo rather than changing the plug. Before continuing any further, I tested the electronics to make sure everything was functioning. With all of the electronics working properly, I could begin to mount them onto the chassis. I cut and then glued a small piece of styrene onto the back for the ESC to sit on. I used some 3M double-sided tape to secure the ESC and receiver. I used Velcro to secure the battery. As I've showed previously, I printed out a set of wheel mounts that look like brake rotors, which I wanted to paint using some Model Masters steel enamel. I also painted the wheels. I think I used either semi-gloss or gloss black acrylic. After allowing the paint to fully cure, I was ready to assemble these parts and have a look at how the finished wheels turned out. The tires I'm using are 3D printed in PLA plastic, providing less traction, allowing the car to easily slide and drift. Next, I install the wheels, first by using the body to figure out how far out the wheels need to be positioned, and then I glue the wheel mounts to the axle shaft. Now, after getting everything assembled and doing some testing, I experienced a few issues and noticed a number of things that really needed improvement. So I ended up doing a lot of rebuilding and experimenting with different parts and made some minor modifications to the design. To save you from the monotony of watching me disassemble and reassemble the chassis half a dozen times, I'm just going to quickly show the final assembly of the chassis and talk a bit about some of the improved parts. One of the more important things that I kept in mind during the assembly was to make sure that the alignment and fitment of all the pieces is correct, and that the drivetrain can rotate smoothly. If there's too much resistance or vibration, this can cause issues, so I do my best to keep this to a minimum, which is especially important on this chassis due to the relatively high power brushless motor. Another thing I did was shorten these springs just a bit to make the suspension softer, and I really focused on getting the alignment of the holes that the knuckles slide through correct so that the suspension can move smoothly. One of the things I didn't like about the chassis previously was how much play there was in the rear knuckles. I installed two links which connect the rear knuckles and keep them from moving, which is probably one of the biggest improvements to the chassis that I made. Once again, I did some quick testing to verify that everything is functioning correctly. Similarly to the Firebird, the heat from the motor is causing the SLA printed mount to soften. To prevent this from becoming a problem, I simply use a small piece of wood to prop up the backside of the motor. With everything on the chassis now complete, the only thing left to do is to mount the wheels. I used a little bit of isopropyl alcohol to clean the axle shafts before gluing the mounts. I decided to try and be a little bit more accurate with the position of the wheel mounts. I start by figuring out around what width I want the chassis to be, and then position the wheels so that they are that width. After test fitting the body to confirm that the width is correct, I mark the position of one of the wheel mounts and then use a ruler to create a mark in the same position on the remaining wheel axles. Finally, I glue each wheel mount onto each axle and install the wheels. After one final test, the chassis is now complete. After the hours spent messing around with different parts and designs to get the drivetrain and suspension operating smoothly, it was very satisfying to finally see the chassis fully assembled. But of course the true test is to see how the car drives. So I set the car down onto some hardwood floor and did a bit of driving. Right from the start, I was pleased with how the car drove. I really didn't know what to expect with this chassis, and although it certainly will need some fine-tuning and minor design tweaks before I can really start to explore this chassis' full potential, it's a lot of fun to drive and reminds me quite a bit of an all-wheel drive Mini Z. I think the biggest improvement for this chassis would be to increase the steering angle, though making any significant increase would be difficult being an all-wheel drive chassis in this small scale. The lack of a smooth low end with this brushless motor is also a bit of a hindrance, especially in a small confined area like this. I've checked to make sure that there is no binding or resistance in the drivetrain, and since this chassis is relatively lightweight and does provide quite a bit of gear reduction, beyond choosing a different motor and/or ESC and receiver, I'm not sure what more can be done to smooth out the throttle at low speeds, but I'll continue to experiment. After hours spent messing around with different parts and trying to get everything working smoothly, it's very satisfying to finally be able to drive the car, and I'm really looking forward to getting the body mounted and continuing to experiment with this chassis. I have been working on some other projects and videos this week as well, which should be ready to be uploaded soon. But since it will probably be at least several days before they are ready, I wanted to give a relatively quick update on this project, especially since a number of people have been asking about it. But be sure to be on the lookout for some more build videos coming in the near future. Also, a little self-promo, the 1/24 scale adjustable jack stands and 2-post lifts are now available on the Make It RC store page. I've been getting a lot of people messaging me requesting that these products be added, and we have finally gotten them listed. The links are below in the description. As always, to conclude today's video, I want to showcase some of the amazing vehicles and projects that have been recently showcased on the Make It RC Facebook group. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.